What is going on, guys? This is Miasin. So yesterday I made a video about the board breaker version of Silent Enforcer, Voiceless Voice. It's actually a really interesting deck and a really interesting way to play the deck as well. With 0 hand traps, you don't necessarily have to play hand traps in Yu-Gi-Oh! Right now in order to win going second. Obviously they help, but if you can play board breakers instead, it could definitely be just as good, if not sometimes even better depending on the metagame, because it also really depends on what people choose to play. For example, if people choose to play, decks like Despia, the Gimmick Puppet Nightmare Lock is not something that you're necessarily going to beat with some board breakers. With Ash, for example, is going to be good, whereas Ash against the fire decks might backfire against you because of, Hita being able to summon it back and then climb into a princess and then keep playing the game. So there is definitely pros and cons to everything, but if you want to commit to the board breakers, which ones are you trying to play? Obviously, this is a very complex question, but at least all I can do for this video right here is to show you one really interesting board breaker that I think you can actually incorporate to a lot of decks if you are going with the board breaker approach, and this card is Enemy Controller. So there is quite a lot to cover about this card, but before we go any further, I would really appreciate if you could smash the like and subscribe button for me real quick. It really motivates me a lot to keep making videos like these, always, with the card reviews, deck profiles, etc. So yeah, thank you so much for your support, and now let's get right into it. Okay, so first of all, Enemy Controller is a pretty old quickly spell card, so it's not once per turn, which is really nice, just like all these monster stealing cards except Triple Tactic Talent, and it is a quickly spell, unlike these cards, so it has the flexibility and the speed of being able to just be very good going second, but also be good going first. Unlike these cards where if you draw them going first, they literally do nothing, unless you get like Nibiru or a hit by a Bestial, or a monster that summons itself. Even Phantasme wouldn't be really relevant because it could just negate it. But Enemy Controller has two options, so the first one is to change the battle position of an opponent's face-up monster. Not necessarily the most relevant, but the second effect is take control of a face-up monster upon controls by tributing a monster, until the end phase of course. It is a little more expensive obviously than all these cards, but sometimes you can actually use the tribute cost to your advantage. So for example, if one of your cards is getting hit by an Infinite Impermanence or a Veiler, or even if you're under skill drain, you can tribute one of your monsters that has a really powerful effect, and then you still resolve the effect of your monster. So one really nice interaction would be the interaction between Diviner of the Herald and Enemy Controller. I really like that because if your Diviner gets hit by an Imperm, you can chain the Enemy Controller, so your Diviner still resolves. You still send like something from your deck or extra deck to the graveyard, like an Elder Entity Entis. And then since you tributed your Diviner, you don't even have to like send the Trias in order to tribute it. You did it with Enemy Controller. So now the Diviner will trigger in order to special summon the Novox from the deck, which is a 1-card combo. So you're doing a lot here. You're playing through an interruption, and then you're sending an Entis instead of the Trias in order to break another negate or interruption that your opponent has, while chain blocking, because the Diviner can be chain link 1 and the Entis chain link 2, so he can play through 2 interruptions, and then you have your 1-card combo. So yeah, 2 cards plays through 2 potential Omni Negates. That is insane. And Enemy Controller is typically extremely good when you are tributing monsters that are marked for destruction, because you're about to lose them anyways. So cards like, Baron, they negate and destroy. You're about to lose your monster, so you might as well tribute it and then steal something. Even if the steal is negated, it still translates to activating a card like Change of Heart or Snatch, Steal, Mind Control at full power going second. And your monster can still attack, actually. So it's the same thing as Change of Heart, and it's better than Mind Control by a long shot. And it's also, I want to say, better than Snatch, Steal because it doesn't have the weakness of being able to be destroyed at activation in order to just fizzle and do nothing. And just like Diviner, there are a bunch of monsters that can benefit off of being tributed off of Enemy Controller. So some cards, they don't necessarily benefit, but they don't really make you neg. So Snake Eye Populace, that's a great card to send with Enemy Controller. And Flamberge Dragon is also one of them. Sometimes it could even be beneficial to tribute a Flamberge because, you're summoning 2 monsters. So if you're missing that one other extender and you're trying to steal a monster upon controls, then you can go Flamberge tribute while also, place a monster in the spell and trap zone. So if you're going second at least, this is always going to come up. And if you're going first, you have an interruption that is just insane. And also there's some other ways Econ can be beneficial for you outside of dodging interruptions, especially in the Snake Eye deck. Because you can set this card and use it as a way to stop your opponent when you're going first, you can steal an opponent's monster, and instead of just giving it back because you're a nice guy, you don't want to give back a monster on the end phase, you can link it off using IP Masquerena. So that's actually kind of insane. If you can send a Bestial Druisworm, that's also really broken. You're stealing a monster and you're triggering the Druisworm in order to send a monster upon controls. Another nice interaction. And then with the Fenrir, if you can steal a Fenrir from your opponent's field, if he's playing like Ashtir or just any kind of a deck that plays like Fenrir, like Vanquish Soul, that's a good example, and you're playing Kashtira yourself, or you're playing a deck that also plays Fenrir as a splashable engine. I was gonna say engine, but not really. Unless you're playing like Rise Arts and stuff, you're usually just searching Fenrir. But again, if you're playing like Pure Kashtira, stealing a Fenrir could be very, very nice. And it gets your stuff going, so you can afford to brick, have enemy controller and a bunch of hand traps. Same thing if you're playing like a Labyrinth mirror match, almost. Like you can reset back your trap cards and steal your opponent's Lovely. And then you can link off with your opponent's Lovely or like Synchro off or Chaos Angel. If you got like one of the level 2, the Stovey Torvi, that's a decent play instead of having to, again, give this card back. And finally, if you are getting hit by the Gimmick Puppet Nightmare, you cannot summon for the rest of the turn. Obviously, that's a little unfortunate. But with Enemy Controller, at least you get to kind of build a wall. And another cool thing about Enemy Controller is that this is the kind of card that the more you draw of this card, the better it is. Enemy Controller tribute to steal one monster, and then you tribute the stolen monster to steal another monster. And if you got like a third Enemy Controller, you can tribute the stolen monster that you stole with a stolen monster in order to steal a third monster. So yeah, all you have to really do is tribute one of your monsters, and then all the other enemy controllers, they will keep tributing the stolen monsters from your opponent, clearing monsters so that your opponent gets absolutely nothing back. And you're interrupting your opponent. You're removing a body from your opponent's field, which is actually a lot of pressure. So again, as an interruption, it really does remind me a lot of the duality between Forbidden Droplet and Dark Ruler. Like Dark Ruler, just like Change of Heart, really bad going first. Droplet, at least you can set it as a trap, quote unquote. Enemy Controller, pretty much the same. But I want to say usually Enemy Controller has a higher likelihood of being like a kind of like a turn skipping card than Droplet. And another really nice thing about Enemy Controller is that in a world where people are playing a lot of monster stealing cards, I mean, Triple Tactic Talents is like almost a staple in every single deck right now. If your opponent chooses to steal one of your monsters, with Enemy Controller, you can steal your monster back. You're playing around TTT if you've got Enemy Controller. All you have to do is just give up one monster, which, again, in the Snake Eye deck is a joke because you're generating 2 bodies on your opponent's turn when you're getting rid of Flamberge. So you're never running out of monsters to tribute. And then, yeah, you just get like whatever your opponent stole from you and you're back to square one and your opponent wasted a TTT for nothing. Now, there are some other interactions with Enemy Controller that I think are really interesting. So obviously, the majority of the time, you're stealing a monster with Econ, but sometimes you are putting a monster into attack, such as Baguska, because this is almost an interruption, or rather a way to make yourself play through one, because the Baguska is only a dangerous floodgate in defense, but in attack position, all it really is a monster that cannot be targeted or destroyed by card effects, and I could care less about it. This is irrelevant. So if I could at least like make the Baguska no longer in defense with Enemy Controller, you know, I'm a winner there. This is really important. Against the Fire King deck, if you can steal an Appaloosa, you are doing so much because you are playing through way more interruptions after that, because now you can start negating the Princess in the graveyard. You can start negating the Garunix, the Kirin in hand, and you can also negate your opponent's hand traps with the stolen Appaloosa, which is even nastier. You can also steal your opponent's Ambler Whale so that your opponent has no more fire monsters. And then you can run over Appaloosa, and then in main phase 2 or something, you can go into a Zelantis, and then you give nothing back to your opponent again. Or you could just steal any monster and go into a Typhon, so that guarantees that literally every single monster that you're stealing, you're never giving back. Alternatively, you could, steal a Princess and then summon back the monster that you tributed, like if you're tributing like a fire monster, which is also pretty nice because then you get to climb into a Link 4 monster. So the fact that your opponent is summoning back the Princess can actually backfire against him. That's beautiful. Against SP, you have to know how it is worded. It has to target 2 face-up monsters on the field and banish both until the end phase. So you can actually dodge the effect completely by tributing your monster that's being targeted so that the other monster doesn't get banished, and then you can run over SP and then your opponent starts with less follow-up for next turn. So that's also not too bad, and if you can steal a Masquerena, I don't know if like your opponent still summons, but I don't think so because it has to be using monsters you control, including this card, and if you no longer control Masquerena at Resolution, then I don't see how it still Link summons, but you know, that is some good food for thought. I will check how it functions. Again, if you're stealing an Xyz monster, you can make a Zeus on top. But unfortunately, this card does have some limitations, and the first one is against Silent Forcer, so it's actually good in Silent Forcer, but not really against, because if they got Barrier with Skull Guardian and Novox, you can't even legally activate Enemy Controller because nothing is targetable, unfortunately. It is what it is. Against Anti-Spell, it looks like it's good because it's a quick play spell card, but you have to already summon a monster on the field in order to use Enemy Controller, and usually that's going to be dead like until main phase 1, but Anti-Spell is always flipped on your draw phase or standby, which means that Enemy Controller, even though it's a quick play, it is unfortunately very bad into Anti-Spell. And against Purely, it's also very bad because by the time your opponent summons Expurely Noir, it's going to be on your standby phase, which again, you don't really have the time to summon a monster in order to go Enemy Controller to steal a your opponent's E-Purely Noir or something. Against the Centurion deck, this, I actually, I learned that recently, but you can't just steal their Legatia and then hope that they can't go Crimson Dragon into King Calamity, because King Calamity makes it so that you can target a level 7 or higher Synchro monster on the field, not necessarily on your field. So even if you steal the Legatia, your opponent can still target your stolen monster, and then you can still make a King Calamity. So yeah, don't rely on this card for these decks. So Centurion, Purely, and then Anti-Spell in general, and Silent Enforcer. Again, against like Fire King, Snake Eyes deck, or almost like everyone, basically, enemy controller is going to be very good. And I do believe that it is still a board breaker worth main decking if you choose to go with board breakers instead, or it could be in your side deck so that you never have it against the bad matchups. But yeah, that's about all I had to say for this video, guys. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you guys very soon. Peace.